Hello, everyone. A lot of people have been doubting my ability to pronounce channel names. This is Kings and Generals. Maybe. Yep, Kings and Generals. It is. Yep, still is. That wasn't me. That was my neighbor has a scaffolding company, and so let's just go ahead and get into the video. He's a scaffolding company? That's what I say to cover a burp? Ugh.
12 weeks ago, the Pacific War started with the critical attack on Pearl Harbor and the start of the Japanese invasions across East Asia. Now, the first phase of their expansion is near its end, and the desired prize is within reach of the Japanese Empire. Last week we covered the start of the First Battle of the Java Sea, and the failure of the Abda Command to stop the invasion of Java from taking place. Today we're going to see its disastrous conclusion and the final surrender of the Dutch East Indies, as the Japanese finally land on the island of Java. Even without World War to worry about, it's still hard to maintain inner peace with so many sources of anxiety all around. But now you can get back on track with our sponsor, Endel, an app that creates personal...
Thank you, Endel.
As we've previously discussed, the Japanese had planned to execute two main amphibious assaults, one in Western Java, to be carried out by the 2nd Division of Lieutenant General Maruyama Masao and the Shoji detachment of Colonel Shoji Toshinari, and one in Eastern Java by the main strength of Lieutenant General Tsuchihashi Yutsu's 48th Division, accompanied by the bulk of the Sakaguchi detachment. Two strong fleets escorted the Japanese convoys, which had departed their assembly points by February 19th and were near their objectives by February 27th. Meanwhile, the Dutch defended their main island with 3 fully equipped, albeit poorly trained divisions, under the command of General Hein te Putten, totaling some 25,000 soldiers, mostly Indonesian. He divided his forces into 3 areas, with the 1st Division in Batavia and Western Java, the 2nd Division in Central Java, and the 3rd Division in Eastern Java. His plan was to hold on as long as possible to the 3 main bases at Bandung, Cilacap and Suarabaja. General Wavell had also reinforced the Dutch troops with around 6,000 British and American soldiers, while the Australians had sent the brigade-strong Black Force of Brigadier Arthur Blackburn by February 16th. Additionally, naval forces at Java were under the command of Admiral Helfrich, who had formed 2 strike forces to intercept and destroy the invasion fleets before they could land on the shores of Java. At the Java Sea, we left Admiral Doorman's Eastern Striking Force retreating eastwards, while Admiral Takagi regrouped his forces to the north. The battle seemed over, but with night falling, Doorman decided to press his attack, rapidly turning to the northeast with his remaining forces in a last attempt to save Eastern Java. Yet again, Japanese float planes flying over the Allied fleet immediately reported to Takagi that Doorman was moving back north, which caught the Japanese admiral off guard. He quickly tried to reassemble his dispersed forces, while 2 damaged destroyers of Admiral Nishimura's 4th Squadron retreated to protect the convoy. Around 1930, after spotting the Allied formation to the southeast, Admiral Tanaka's 2nd Squadron positioned itself in front of Takagi's cruisers to cover them from the incoming enemy fire.
On the last video, Timur, they talked about the Japanese had a secret weapon, and that was more of like a long distance. That's what happens when you drink. You forget things. Had a long range, not missile. Oh my goodness, why can't I think of the word? An underwater missile. What the hell is it, and why isn't it coming to me? Torpedo. Shouldn't take that long. They had long range torpedoes. So it's interesting that Doorman is is taking the fight to them with that risk, but he seems to be maybe closer now than I remember on the last video. So maybe he's shortening up that distance so that his torpedoes would work just like theirs would work. That would no, because torpedoes are torpedoes. If they hit, they're still going to hit. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying now. I've been drinking. I apologize.
The small fire exchange was inconsequential, and thus Doorman changed course to the east, determined to get through to the transports. His intention was to get around the Japanese formation by heading towards the southern coast of Java. At 2100, he turned back to the west with his 4 cruisers and the destroyer Jupiter, while the American destroyers under Commander Thomas Binford headed back to Suwarabhaja to refuel and load more torpedoes. Around 2130, bad luck struck Doorman once more when the Jupiter hit a Dutch mine and foundered hours later, leaving the Dutch admiral with just his 4 cruisers while he continued to the north in search of the Japanese convoy. Around 2200, Takagi also suffered some bad luck, as he lost radio contact with his float planes, leaving him blind for the first time in the battle. Desperately, he turned south, finally spotting the Allied column around 2300. While Takagi's cruisers turned north on a parallel course to Doorman's cruisers, Tanaka's squadron prepared to make a deadly torpedo attack. 10 minutes later, the Allied cruisers spotted their enemy and began the fire exchange. Around 2320, the Japanese cruisers finally launched some 12 torpedoes against the Allied formation. Despite Doorman's effort to evade the torpedo attack, his determination and his previous failures had brought him at last to his final doom. At 2336, the Java was hit, causing the aft magazine to explode. Within 15 minutes, the cruiser had sunk, with the loss of 509 sailors.
Wow.
4 minutes later, the De Ruyter was also hit on her aft, suffering a large fire that engulfed the entire stern position of the ship. Powerless, the cruiser sank hours later, suffering 344 losses, among them the Dutch admiral. Taking advantage of the smoke and confusion, the Houston and Perth then changed course and escaped to the southeast, successfully arriving at Tanjong Priok the following day. This concluded the first battle of the Java Sea, leaving Abticom with the loss of 2 cruisers, 3 destroyers, and one of its leading commanders. The Japanese Eastern Force was now free to continue their landings unmolested. Meanwhile, the Western striking force had also failed to intercept the Japanese invasion fleet, with the invaders' landings also proceeding as expected. To avoid any more losses, Helfrich was then persuaded to order a withdrawal, with most of the Western force escaping through the Sunda Strait before the arrival of the Japanese. Yet by February 28th,
Mute. Oh, we did it. This guy, who cares what he has to say? I'll smack you in the face right now. I don't care about your laundry sauce. And back to the video. My nose itches.
Yet by February 28th, 8 destroyers and 3 cruisers remained trapped on Java's northern shore. At dusk, the cruisers Houston and Perth, and then HNLMS Evertson departed Tanjong Priok, heading towards the Sunda Strait to escape to safety. Despite the poor Japanese initial deployment, leaving the convoys in a vulnerable position, the 5th Squadron of Rear Admiral Hara Kanzaburo managed to intercept the Allied cruisers and cover the transports with a smokescreen. Hara then attacked in a chaotic way, performing really poorly and only causing light damage to the enemy. What is worse, the Japanese torpedo attack missed the Allied cruisers and hit 4 Japanese transports and a mine layer at Bantam Bay, sinking the 5 vessels, including the one that carried General Imamura, although he managed to survive this experience. In the early hours of March 1st, the Allied cruisers were surrounded and finally hit by torpedoes, then sinking into their final resting place. The destroyer Evertson had caught up to the 2 cruisers and watched the battle from a distance and attempted to escape along the coast of Sumatra, but ended up spotted by Japanese destroyers Murakumo and Shirakumo and had to run aground. At the same time, Binford's 4 American destroyers, which had decided to escape through the narrow Bali Strait, were detected and came under fire by patrolling Japanese destroyers. The fire exchange was inconclusive though, and the destroyers successfully managed to quickly escape under the cover of smokescreens. The last of the Allied vessels were the damaged cruiser Exeter and the destroyers Pope and Encounter, arriving at the Sunda Strait in the late morning. Their desperate escape was doomed from the start, being rapidly spotted by Japanese aircraft, and so Admiral Takahashi had laid a trap for them. 4 Japanese heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers began to hunt down the Allied force, with the Pope and Encounter laying a smokescreen to protect Exeter from the incoming fire. For the first hour, the invaders failed to score any hits, yet they were continuing to close in on the Allied vessels. Despite their brave resistance, the Japanese cruisers finally scored a crippling blow on the Exeter, causing her to lose power and then sink. The Allied destroyers would also be hunted down in the next hours, with Encounter getting scuttled due to the strong Japanese fire, and with Pope also getting scuttled after an intense aerial bombardment. In the remainder of the day, 4 more Allied destroyers would get destroyed by Japanese aerial and naval attacks to the south, ending the Second Battle of the Java Sea and naval campaign in the Dutch East Indies. On land, however, the Battle of Java was merely starting. By 0400 on March 1st, and despite the friendly fire, the bulk of the 2nd Division had successfully landed around Bantam Bay, with the intention of advancing on Batavia and then Bandung, while the Shoji detachment also landed at the patrol area to capture the valuable Kelijeti airfield. On the other side, the Eastern Force suffered some aerial bombardment, although this couldn't prevent the 48th Division and the Sakaguchi detachment from landing at Kragan, with the objective of taking Rembang and then the Kepu oil field before attacking Sawerabaja and Cilacap. On Bantam Bay, the 2nd Division divided itself into 3 detachments, with the Nesu detachment advancing on Rangkasbitung towards the key Buetazorch town between Batavia and Bandung, the Fukushima detachment immediately capturing Mount Merak and Merak Island before advancing on Pamarian towards Batavia, and the Sato detachment pushing along the coastal road through Bantam and Tangerang towards Batavia. Quickly and decisively, the Nasu detachment managed to overcome Dutch resistance at Merak, Kiligon and Serang before getting to Rangkasbitung by dusk. Meanwhile, from Eretan, the Shoji detachment immediately divided in 2, with 1 battalion charging against the Kelijeti airfield and the other heading towards the Kwarang Bridge over the...
I'm sorry, I gotta ask. With everything I've seen so far, how did Japan lose? Ultimately, was it that they just spread themselves too thin? Because I've seen nothing but domination in 24 videos. Minus, a loss here or a loss there. I mean, honestly, 24 videos, I've probably seen them get pushed back or whatever 3. Sorry, I had to burp. 3, 4, maybe 5 times. Maybe. But I've seen them do like this is what Japan does. They don't stop. This is what the people do fighting them. Here's Japan. Here's Japan. I rarely see Japan have to go backwards or this way. So I have to ask, was it just years of war where the people got tired, which I don't think that was true? Did they run out of soldiers, which I gotta believe everyone was willing to fight for the emperor? Did they spread themselves too thin? Did they eventually just run out of oil? Run out of bullets? Run out of ships, planes, weapons? And I'm asking now, obviously it's hypothetical because there's so many more. We're on number 15. They're up to 70. I'm going to find the answer. But I'm asking now, just as a hypothetical, like, how were they losing? How did they lose in the end? Because so far, 20-some videos, I've seen nothing but an avalanche. And they're the avalanche. And everything that's in front of them when they go down that hill is demolished. So I have to ask. It's just amazing.
Kitarum River. Rushing towards the airfield, the Wakamatsu unit rapidly engaged the Dutch defenders, driving them off 4 times and getting to Kalijetti by midday.
That's what I mean.
There, the Japanese seized the airfield after overrunning the defenders and immediately started to refit it for use. Yet despite this initial success, the detachment was attacked at Eritan by 500 Dutch troops in armoured vehicles, which could only be repelled after a hard-fought struggle. The loss of Kalijetti was huge, however, and Tiportin immediately ordered counterattacks.
Japanese war crimes. Japanese executed 80 of the surrounding British and Dutch troops in reprisal. Man.
To retake it. And from Kragen, the Eastern Force rapidly set up to execute its operations. The Sekiguchi detachment only got to seize Blora by nightfall, but the 48th Division had one element capture Rembang, while the rest of the division headed towards Kepu and Bojonegoro. On March 2nd, the vanguard...
Oh, no. Volume. We did it, team. High five. Oh, yeah. Ooh. What am I looking at? I don't want to look at this anymore. I don't care what this guy did. You mosquito murderer. And back to the video.
On March 2nd, the vanguard of the Nasu detachment encountered Australian gunners at Chipitung, which obstructed the road to Le Willian. An intense fight ensued, but the invaders got the upper hand in the end and advanced up to Lawangtaji. Meanwhile, the Fukushima detachment reached the Pomarian Bridge by midnight, and the Seto detachment got to the bridge of Kragilan, successfully establishing a foothold over the Chujung River. But in Subang, the situation was desperate for the isolated Shoji detachment. 250 soldiers and 25 light tanks attacked Shoji's headquarters there and overran the Japanese positions. Yet the invaders held their ground, and after destroying 20 enemy vehicles, the Dutch attack was repelled at last. At the same time, Sekiguchi captured the towns of Purudadi and Nyawen, while the 48th Division easily defeated a Dutch unit and occupied Kepu and its already destroyed oil field. The Japanese got to the Bojonegoro Bridge as well, but found it destroyed due to delaying actions on behalf of the Allies. The following day, however, the invaders had crossed the Solo River and started to engage some defenders on the other side, while the Sekiguchi detachment also seized Bugel and prepared for an attack against Surakata. In the meantime, Shoji and the Wekimetsu unit prepared to brace for another Dutch counterattack with armoured vehicles. The Japanese put up a good fight, but the difference was made by the aircraft flying from the Kalijetti airfield, which managed to destroy over 150 Dutch vehicles and cause over 100 Dutch casualties. At this point, fearing encirclement, Shoji decided to prepare for an attack on Banda, and to call back the units advancing towards Kwarang to instead traverse through better roads from Kalijetti. Moreover, upon reaching Lo Williang, the vanguard of the Nasu detachment went into battle with the main strength of Black Force, which managed to hold the invaders' advance from their entrenched pillboxes, while...
It's stuff like that. They managed to hold them. They didn't defeat them. You got 3 units going against, and units is a terrible way to phrase it, but 3 divisions taking on 1. Now I don't know how many is in each, so I can't really. There could be more here than in here. I understand that, but I'm looking at the numbers. 3 compared to 1. You got 3 poker chips compared to 1 poker chip, and that 1 poker chip is barely... It's not even being defeated by the 3. I'm just amazed by their fighting and just the determination. It's just amazing.
Both the Fukushima and Seto detachment arrived to the Chidurian River, capturing the bridges at Maja and Parigi. Seeing no roads from Maja, Fukushima would then be ordered to support Nasu's rear, while Seto's vanguard also advanced and captured the town of Balaraja on the next day, getting ever closer to Batavia. In the early hours of March 4th, knowing that they had to break through Lo Liang to save Shoji, the main strength of the Nasu detachment joined the fight against Black Force. Thus, the 16th Regiment was ordered to execute a flanking maneuver to the south, while the rest of the detachment contained the Australians with fire. Under the cover of darkness, the 16th crossed the Chenten River and charged against the positions of an Australian company. Black Force gave a tenacious resistance, inflicting many casualties on the invaders, but in the end, the Australians would get surrounded, and Blackburn would order a withdrawal.
Yep.
While they retreated during the night, the same would be done by the Dutch holding on in Batavia. And in Kalijati, the success of the Japanese resistance had allowed the Wakamatsu unit to capture Purukata. The Egashira unit had also managed to turn around, getting to Chikampek with haste and arriving at Hwarang after defeating several Dutch units. They then pursued the retreating Dutch soldiers to Kadungite, where the Egashira unit stopped its advance. Having achieved all his initial objectives, and recognizing that the enemy was concentrating his forces, Shoji then decided to fully commit to an attack against Bandung instead of waiting to suffer another massive counterattack, enjoying the support of the mighty 3rd Air Division. Turning back to the east, we find that Sakaguchi finally concentrated his 3 battalions on Purodadi by afternoon, and then launched his attack on Surukata. They would arrive at the town by early morning on March 5th, charging against the meager Dutch defenders and capturing the town by midday.
Of course they did.
Meanwhile, Sakaguchi's vanguard would also capture Boyolali and, sensing the weakness in the Dutch defences, continued towards Yogyakarta, seizing the town by dusk. Seeing the enemy retreat without restraint, Sakaguchi then decided to closely pursue them until reaching their main objective, Jeladja. Another battalion, however, turned to Mangalang, where it forced the garrison to surrender. But the garrison commander thought that this was the main Japanese force, and so ordered the towns of Semarang and Ambawara to also surrender. After occupying these towns, the battalion would then continue westwards, reaching Purbalingga on March 8th. In the meantime,
let me just say this, kind of stress it. I don't fault the Allies in this situation for surrendering and everything, because I've seen a lot of these videos, and I know that Japan does tend to commit a little war crime here and there, executing people. So I get it. But to me, that's and I get that that's why you would retreat, because you have the fight or flight. And in this situation, you're fighting until it's time to run. We all have that in us. It is what it is. It's just nature. But I'm always, in something like this, they surrender. I would have to assume by surrendering so quickly, they're not going to kill you. And you're probably looking at it like it's better to just surrender now instead of continuing to fight and run, fight and run, fight. Eventually, they're just going to get pissed, catch up with you, and just annihilate you. I get it. So, I'm not trying to insult the Allies for this constant running. I'm just so impressed with the fact that Japan just doesn't stop. And I'm not trying to insult the Allies by saying that. It's just impressive. And I can totally get why Kings and Generals made this series, because it's impressive.
the 48th Division had finally crossed the Solo River, continuing its advance towards the Brantus River on March 5th. The vanguard of the 48th, mainly consisting of the 47th Regiment and the 4th Tank Regiment, then advanced to Cherubin, where they defeated a Dutch unit and pursued them with haste to Ketasono. There they engaged almost 1,000 enemy troops and managed to capture the town by midday, with another element capturing Kadiri later that day. Meanwhile, important events.
Oh no, we got to mute. We just got it. Just under the wire. No one can see what you're saying, lady. It's my face there. No one cares. Back to the murders.
Meanwhile, important events were happening in the west. Departing Balaraja in the morning, the Satu detachment discovered that the Dutch forces were retreating, and thus advanced with haste through Tangerang and finally arrived at Batavia by dusk. During the night, the Japanese triumphantly entered the colonial capital without opposition, allowing the rest of the division to focus on Bandung. But unbeknownst to the 2nd Division, Shoji had already sent the Wakamatsu unit southwards to Chiata, where it arrived by afternoon. There, however, the invaders were engaged by tenacious defenders in pillboxes across 2 lines. At the end of the day, the pillbox positions had been successfully taken with the help of the 3rd Air Division. But on the following day, the Wakamatsu unit directly attacked the main enemy position at Chiata Pass. There, Major General Jakob Pesman had around 9,000 men covered with jungle in strong pillboxes and barbed wire entanglements, with the mission of holding off the invaders. But taking advantage of a thick fog, the Japanese charged all at once and took the defenders by surprise, quickly routing them. At this point, if Wakamatsu decided to pursue them, he could have entered Bandung unopposed, but instead decided to wait for the Egashira unit out of sheer friendship to the battalion commander, not wanting to steal the glory he deserved as well. Back with the 2nd Division, when they received...
It's actually kind of respectful. And something you wouldn't expect from war, to where like you respect your partner so much so that you don't want to look like you taken glory from them.
News of Shoji's attack on March 6th. The Sato detachment was immediately sent to reinforce them at Kelijeti. At the same time, however, the Nasu and Fukushima detachments were encroaching on Baltazar through Jamaga, yet they found the Australians there retreating. The Japanese then charged into the town and successfully seized Baltazar. And to the east, the 48th Division continued its advance, getting to Mojokerto and sending its vanguard to charge against Porong, while the rest of the division continued towards Suerabaja. The invaders quickly broke through the Dutch defences, and by afternoon they had captured Porong. On March 7th, preparations continued for the attacks against Suerabaja and Jelatjap, but the Shoji detachment would bring about the rapid conclusion of the campaign. While the Wakamatsu unit consolidated on the ridgeline and mopped up the remaining enemy units, General Pesman found his position untenable and decided to surrender. At Isola Hotel, General Imamura then demanded the total capitulation of the Dutch East Indies, something General Terpoten and the governor initially refused, claiming they didn't have that authority. But on the morning of March 8th, the Dutch commander conceded defeat at last and agreed to the capitulation of all of his troops, something that was broadcasted later on during the night. Elsewhere, the 48th Division entered Suerabaja, meeting no resistance, and Sakaguchi began his assault on Jelatjap, getting to Purwokerto before receiving the Dutch surrender. Across Java and the Dutch East Indies, many Allied units that still resisted would also decide to surrender in the next few days, while others continued to execute guerrilla warfare. Only the Allied units at northern Sumatra continued to resist. Yet on this day, the Empire of the Rising Sun had achieved one of its main objectives of the Pacific War, securing a constant flow of resources for its war machine. This also marked the end of the Abda defense in the Dutch East Indies and the collapse of the Malay Barrier. The Indian Ocean and approach to Australia was now open to the IJN. The Japanese expansion would continue in the following week, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it.
As he said, make sure you're subscribed to my channel, and otherwise you're going to miss when I release the video. That's what he meant, you know? Alright, like and subscribe, and answer my questions now. I demand them answered immediately. I got to release the video first. I just realized that. Okay. So have a good day. Have a good night.